There is a moment in spiritual awakening that almost no one talks about. A moment you can't prepare for, a moment you can never reverse. It happens quietly. No thunder, no golden light, just a subtle shift so deep that your life, from that point on, is divided into before and after. And here is the part most people never tell you. Awakening doesn't give you something. Awakening takes things away, not the things you expected, not the illusions you thought you were ready to let go of. It takes the things you didn't even know you were holding on to, the structures that made you feel safe, stable, familiar. And once they're gone, you can never get them back. It begins when you start to see through the game, the social game, the personal game, the internal game. You notice a faint cracking, a hairline fracture running through everything you once took for granted. You try to ignore it. You try to keep playing along, but something in you has already crossed a threshold. You realize that what you called reality was mostly agreement, unspoken rules, collective fantasies, roles performed so convincingly that you didn't recognize them as roles at all. And the moment you see the performance, the curtain never falls the same way again. You don't become superior or enlightened or wise. You simply become unable to lie to yourself with the same innocence you once had. You can't unsee the artificiality. You can't unknow what you've seen. And you can't shrink back into the comfortable illusions that once held your world together. This is the first loss, and the most destabilizing one. Because it doesn't feel like liberation yet. It feels like exile. You're still in the same world, the same conversations, the same people, the same routines, but something inside you is no longer participating in the same way. You sense the distance, the thinning of the old identity, the dissolving of the old concerns. You start to realize that awakening isn't an addition to your life. It's a subtraction, a peeling away, a hollowing out. And the deeper it goes, the more you begin to suspect a truth that is both terrifying and strangely magnetic. If this is only the beginning, what else will awakening take from you? And more importantly, who will you be when nothing false remains? One of the first things awakening steals from you is something you never imagined would disappear. Your ability to take the social game seriously. It doesn't happen dramatically. There's no clear moment where you say, "I'm done." It happens the way a spell breaks, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize you're no longer enchanted. You watch people maneuvering for status, competing for attention, curating their image with surgical precision. You see the tiny performances that used to feel natural, the polite exaggerations, the strategic laughter, the careful positioning of one's life as a story worth admiring. You see it all, and something in you refuses to pretend you don't. It's not that you become cynical. It's not that you think you're above anyone else. It's simply that the illusion no longer fits over your eyes. You can't unknow that the game is a game. You still move through the same rooms, the same conversations, the same rituals of social life. But you feel like an actor who suddenly woke up in the middle of the play, surrounded by people still convinced the script is real. You smile, you nod. You participate enough to avoid disruption. But internally you've stepped off the stage, and other people can sense it. Not consciously, most won't know what changed, but they feel that something about you is different. You're not competing anymore. You're not validating their status symbols. You're not impressed by the things they worked so hard to be impressive for. They don't know what to call it, so they interpret it as coldness, arrogance, distance. But it's none of those things. It's simply that you can no longer invest emotional energy into a performance you know is just that, a performance. And then another loss emerges, far more subtle and far more painful. Your tolerance for superficiality begins to disintegrate. Once you've tasted depth, real depth, not philosophical entertainment, you can't go back to, "How's the weather?" You can't pretend shallow conversations nourish you. They don't. They feel like eating air and calling it a meal. You want to talk about why people suffer, what fear does to the human mind, why we cling so desperately to masks that are killing us, what it means to be alive, conscious, and terrified at the same time. But most people aren't interested in these things. They want lightness, distraction, comfort, surface-level safety. So you find yourself split between two uncomfortable choices: pretend the surface is enough, or speak from depth and risk making everyone uneasy. Both options feel wrong. One feels false, the other feels isolating. This is the silent loneliness of awakening. You haven't chosen to withdraw from people, but something in you no longer moves at their frequency. And yet the most difficult shift is still ahead. Because once you see the masks that others wear, something even more disturbing begins to happen. You start to see your own. The tiny manipulations, the desire for approval hidden beneath niceness, the curated self-image disguised as humility, the subtle performance you never realized you were giving. Suddenly the problem is not just the world out there, it's the part of you that spent years dancing the same choreography. This is the breaking point, the moment where the game stops being external and becomes internal. And once that happens, there is no turning back. Because if the social mask is cracking, what happens when the self behind it begins to crack as well? Once the social mask begins to crack, something far more unsettling happens. Your innocence about human motivation disappears, not suddenly, not violently, but with a slow, relentless clarity that feels like someone turned on a harsh light in a room you never wanted to examine. You begin to notice things you didn't see before, or perhaps things you didn't allow yourself to see. A person speaks beautifully about compassion, but you catch the flicker of irritation in their eyes when no one praises them for it. Someone claims they value honesty, yet you watch them lie to themselves in every word they speak. You hear passionate declarations about integrity, kindness, justice, and then you witness the tiny acts of cruelty that slip through when no social reward is at stake. Before awakening, you might have taken people at face value. Words meant truth. Smiles meant friendliness. Ideals meant conviction. But now you see the hidden machinery, the fear beneath the virtue, the insecurity beneath the confidence, the hunger for approval beneath the authenticity. It's painful, not because you feel superior, but because you recognize the same shadows in yourself. You start catching your own motivations in real time. That compliment you gave wasn't pure kindness. It was a bid for connection. That argument you insisted on winning wasn't about truth. It was about protecting your image. That moral judgment you delivered wasn't righteousness. It was ego disguised as principle. This is the stage of awakening no one romanticizes, the confrontation with your own unconscious motives. It's like developing X-ray vision you never asked for. You see right through the layers, yours and everyone else's, and the illusions that once held the world together begin to liquefy. You notice something else too. Hatred becomes harder. Blame becomes slippery. The old sense of moral certainty begins to crumble, because once you truly see the roots of human behavior, the conditioning, the childhood wounds, the fear of abandonment, the desperate longing to be seen, loved, accepted, you understand how little of it is personal. You see that cruelty is almost always a symptom of suffering. That arrogance is usually a shield for shame. That dishonesty is the mind trying to protect itself from truths it's not ready to face. You can still set boundaries. You can still walk away from harm. But the righteous anger that once felt so energizing loses its fuel. You can't hate someone once you've seen their wounds. You can't cast them as villains once you've seen their fear. You can't cling to blame once you've understood the machinery beneath their decisions. The world becomes less black and white, and far more tragic and far more compassionate. But this clarity comes with a cost, because the more you see through others, the more you see through yourself. The person you thought you were, the consistent, solid, reliable me you've been protecting and defending, begins to look suspiciously like another construct, another mask, another story. This is where the ground beneath your identity starts to shake. Because if people aren't who they think they are, and you aren't who you thought you were, then who or what is actually living your life? There comes a moment in awakening that feels like stepping off the edge of a cliff, not because something pushes you, but because the ground you thought was solid suddenly isn't there anymore. It begins quietly, almost innocently. You start noticing how different you are depending on where you are, who you're with, what is expected of you. At first it seems normal, everyone shifts a little, but then you start to wonder, if I can be this different in each situation, which one is the real me? You try to hold on to the version that feels most familiar, the consistent one. The coherent one, the one you've spent years constructing, but something in you knows none of them are completely accurate, none of them are the whole picture, none of them are permanent. And then the realization hits with the force of a quiet earthquake. The self you've spent your life protecting isn't a solid entity. It's a flowing process, a collection of memories, habits, fears, desires, narratives, constantly rearranged, constantly rewritten. You're not a rock, you're a river. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a destabilizing truth. Because if the self is a river, always moving, always changing, then who is the one trying so desperately to hold it still? The mind rebels against this. It tries to cling to identity like someone clinging to a branch in a flood. It tells you, I must be someone, I must be a fixed person. There has to be a solid me behind all of this. But the more you look, the less you find. You don't discover a core, you discover layers. And when you peel those layers back, you don't find a final truth. You find more layers. Eventually you face a terrifying possibility. The I you've believed in your entire life may be nothing more than a convenient story. A story that helped you navigate the world, but a story nonetheless. And if the storyteller is a story, what does that make the story itself? You begin to examine your past with new eyes. All the moments you called defining suddenly look different. The meanings you gave them dissolve. You realize that the same event could be framed as triumph or tragedy, trauma or initiation, depending entirely on the narrative lens you choose. Which means the story of your life is not the truth of your life. It's an interpretation. One of many possible versions. This is where things become deeply disorienting. You don't just lose your story. You lose the belief that any single story could ever capture what you are. You become, in a strange way, storyless, not because you stop telling stories, but because you stop mistaking them for reality. They become costumes instead of identities, tools instead of truths. And as the story collapses, so does the weight you once placed on being a certain kind of person, consistent, coherent, reliable, defined. You see the absurdity of trying to be the same you in every moment, when life itself never repeats a moment. But this dissolution comes with a shadow, a heavy, silent fear. Because if you're not who you thought you were, if the story isn't solid, if the self is a river, then who is making your choices? Who is experiencing your experiences? Who is living your life? The question doesn't have an immediate answer, and the mind hates that. It demands certainty. It demands a center. It demands a me. But awakening doesn't hand you a new identity. It takes away the old one. It leaves you facing a vast unknown. And yet, the most profound loss is still ahead, because once the self begins to dissolve, everything built on top of that self, your goals, your achievements, your sense of direction, begins to shake as well. When the sense of a solid self begins to dissolve, something unexpected happens next. Everything that depended on that self, your goals, your ambitions, your carefully constructed vision of the future, begins to wobble like a building losing its foundation. At first, you try to ignore it. You cling to old motivations. I need to achieve this. I need to become that. I need to get somewhere that finally feels like enough. But there's a new, quiet clarity inside you now, and it starts asking questions you used to avoid. Why am I chasing this? What is it supposed to give me? And why does arrival always seem one step away no matter how much I accomplish? Before awakening, goals felt meaningful. They gave you direction. They filled the emptiness with purpose. They gave you a storyline to inhabit, the hero overcoming obstacles, collecting milestones, climbing towards some imagined summit. But as awakening deepens, you begin to see the hidden machinery behind this striving. You notice how every achievement dissolves the moment you reach it. The satisfaction lasts seconds, maybe minutes, and then the mind demands the next conquest. This wasn't enough. You need more. You need better. You need bigger. It's an endless conveyor belt of becoming, a psychological treadmill designed to keep you running without ever arriving. And then the truth hits you with devastating clarity. You were never chasing the achievement. You were chasing the feeling you hoped the achievement would give you. A feeling of worth, a feeling of completion, a feeling of finally being someone. But if the self you're chasing that feeling for is not solid, who exactly are you trying to complete? As this realization sinks in, something begins to crumble. The logic of your entire life, study, work, improve, achieve, ascend, starts to feel strangely hollow. You watch people around you running the same loops, believing that the next promotion, the next relationship, the next milestone will finally deliver peace. You want to believe it too. It was comforting. It gave your life structure. It gave your suffering meaning. But once you see the loop, you can't unsee it. And then comes the loss that feels like the death of a dream. You lose the hope of a final arrival. Not because awakening is bleak, but because the fantasy of one day everything will be perfect was the last illusion holding your old world together. You realize there is no finish line, no ultimate moment where everything settles. No chapter in the future where the story resolves and the credits roll. Life is movement, questions birthing more questions, peace dissolving into challenge, growth unfolding into more growth. This realization is not peaceful at first. It's terrifying. Because if there is no arrival, then what is the point of all this effort? Why keep striving? Why keep building? Why keep trying? This is the existential cliff where many people turn back to distraction, back to ambition, back to illusion. Not because they are weak, but because awakening requires you to stand in open space without any promise of resolution. But if you stay, if you don't run, something extraordinary begins to surface. A different kind of motivation, a different relationship with action, a different way of moving through the world, not chasing completion, not proving your worth, not trying to outrun the emptiness, but acting from a place that isn't trying to arrive anywhere at all. And this shift leads directly into the strangest, most disorienting freedom you have ever encountered. The freedom that feels like nothingness before it feels like liberation. When the illusion of arrival collapses, something unexpected emerges in its shadow. Not clarity, not peace, not joy, but space. A wide, unsettling, silent space where all the old motivations used to live. At first, it feels like loss, layered on loss. The loss of certainty, the loss of structure, the loss of the inner narrative that once told you who you were and where you were going. You stand inside this emptiness, like someone stepping into a house whose furniture has been removed. Everything echoes. Everything feels too open. There's nothing to hold on to. This is the part of awakening most people never talk about because it doesn't feel like awakening at all. It feels like free fall. You're no longer controlled by the social game. But that means you no longer know your place in it. You're no longer driven by unconscious motives. But that means many of your old actions suddenly feel hollow. You're no longer defined by a solid self. But that means there's no identity to stabilize you. You're no longer guided by your old story. But that means the map you relied on has dissolved. And you're no longer propelled by the hope of arrival. But that means there's no finish line to aim for. This is the stage where freedom first appears, not as liberation, but as absence. The absence of illusions, the absence of guarantees, the absence of the psychological scaffolding that once held you upright. It feels like standing naked in front of life, without armor, without storyline, without a mask to hide behind. Most people think awakening is a gain, a treasure, a revelation that lifts you above suffering. But before it gives you anything, awakening strips you down to nothing. It confronts you with the raw fact that life has no built-in meaning, that identity is fluid, that certainty is impossible, and that you cannot rely on anything external to tell you who you are. This is freedom in its first form, cold, clean, and terrifying. Because you can't blame the world anymore. You can't hide behind roles. You can't pretend the story defines you. You can't soothe yourself with the promise that everything will make sense later. There is only this moment, unfiltered, unframed, unprotected. But something subtle begins to shift once you stop resisting the emptiness. Once you stop trying to rebuild the cage you just escaped. Once you accept that there is no ground to stand on. A new kind of freedom appears. Not the freedom to escape life, but the freedom to meet it directly. To act without trying to become someone. To love without needing certainty. To create without chasing validation. To live without demanding guarantees. It's a freedom that doesn't feel warm at first. It feels honest, it feels spacious, it feels frighteningly real. But beneath that fear, something else begins to wake up. Something that isn't defined by stories, or roles, or goals, or identities. Something that has been here long before the illusions began, and remains long after they dissolve. And in this quiet, unnerving freedom, a final realization starts to take shape. If everything you lost was never truly you, then what remains after the loss might be the first real glimpse of who you actually are. When the illusions fall away and the dust finally settles, you're left with something strange, a life that looks the same from the outside, yet feels entirely different from within. You wake up in the same body, you walk through the same rooms, you speak to the same people. But the old machinery, the roles, the stories, the inner narratives, no longer dictates how you move. You act, but you're not performing. You choose, but you're not proving anything. You love, but you're not negotiating for approval. You speak, but you're not curating an identity. Life becomes simpler, cleaner, more immediate. Not because everything is resolved, nothing is. Awakening doesn't grant perfection, it grants honesty. The honesty of seeing life as a series of unfolding moments rather than a scripted destiny. The honesty of responding instead of performing. The honesty of showing up without demanding a guarantee. Without the need for a solid self to defend, you become more fluid, more flexible, more alive. Without the weight of a rigid story, every moment has room to surprise you. Without the endless chase for arrival, you begin to notice the extraordinary textures of the present. Textures that were always there, but drowned out by the noise of becoming. And without the constant need to be someone, you start to sense something deeper than identity, something quieter than thought, something older than the story of your life. Call it awareness, call it presence, call it consciousness. Call it whatever you want, but once you feel it, you recognize it as the only part of you that was never threatened by any of the losses, because it was never part of the illusion to begin with. This is the final paradox of awakening. You lose everything you believed yourself to be, and discover something you never realized you always were. Not a better version of the old self, not a wiser character in the same story, not a hero who has finally arrived. Something prior to all of that. Something spacious, silent, aware. And as this recognition deepens, you finally understand the truth hidden in the very first step of awakening. There are things you lose that you can never get back. But what remains after the loss? The quiet presence watching the rise and fall of every identity, every thought, every emotion, is the only thing that cannot be taken from you, the only thing that cannot be lost. And if you've followed this journey all the way to this point, you already know that something in you has crossed the line of no return. If this way of seeing resonates, if something inside you recognizes this strange freedom beneath all the loss, then stay with this space. Awakening doesn't end here, it begins here. And if you're ready to keep walking, subscribe and continue this exploration with us.